There are places in this world where history holds its breath, where time buries secrets beneath soil, sea, and silence. Lost treasures never recovered, vanished empires leaving behind trails of gold and shadow. Tonight, I invite you to cross the line between the real and the legendary. What you find might just change how you see the past. The Ark of the Covenant. Few relics have ever carried such immense symbolic, religious, and cultural weight as the Ark of the Covenant. Not merely because of what it once represented, but because of what it continues to embody today. Wrapped in a veil of mystery that the passage of centuries has never been able to lift. People speak of it with reverence, with caution, sometimes even with fear. The Ark was never just a sacred object. For those who believed and still believe in its power, it was a direct link between heaven and earth, between the divine and the human. An artifact said to bring down walls, seal eternal pacts, destroy armies, and punish the unworthy. And yet, today it is gone. Its origin, according to the Hebrew scriptures, dates back to the moment when Moses climbed Mount Sinai to receive the tablets of the law. There, among thunder and smoke, God gave him not only the commandments but also precise instructions for building an ark of acacia wood, overlaid with gold inside and out, with 2 cherubim facing each other on the lid. It was not simply a box. The ark was the living symbol of the covenant between the people of Israel and their God, a testament to the sacred alliance forged in the desert beneath the shadow of fire and cloud. From the moment it was created, the ark wasn't merely transported. It was escorted like a queen. Wherever the ark went, so too went the presence of God. Biblical accounts describe it as the central figure in decisive battles, such as the conquest of Jericho, where the city's walls crumbled after the ark, accompanied by priests and trumpets, circled it for 7 days. It said that no one could touch it without being consumed. Not even the Levites, responsible for its care, were allowed to look upon it directly. It was so sacred, so charged with divine energy, that it had to be covered before being moved. Any violation was punished with immediate death. Over the course of centuries, through the era of the judges, of Saul, of David, and of Solomon, the ark was eventually brought to Jerusalem, into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, the most sacred space within the most sacred building of the Jewish people. There it rested, surrounded by silence and shadow, incense and prayer. No one, except the high priest once a year, was permitted to enter its presence. The temple was not merely a gathering place. It was the ark's home, and by extension, the dwelling place of God himself. And then came the loss, a dark, murky event whose precise chronology fades in the haze of time. It is said that when the Babylonians invaded Jerusalem in the year 586 before Christ, the temple was looted and destroyed, and the ark vanished. Some say it was taken to Babylon along with the temple's treasures. Others believe the priests hid it somewhere before the invaders entered. There are also those who think it was moved much earlier in anticipation of desecration, perhaps to Egypt or even farther south to Ethiopia. Here is where the theories begin, the legends, the obsessions. Some claim the ark was hidden in a secret cave beneath the Temple Mount and remains there to this day, protected by ancient defense mechanisms. Others point to Aksum, Ethiopia, where the Church of St. Mary of Zion is said to house it, guarded by a single monk who may never leave its grounds, destined to be its lifelong protector. There are those who claim to have seen it, though none have provided conclusive proof. Archaeologists seek it, theologians study it, mystics dream of it. But the truth remains. No one has yet discovered where it lies. What fascinates about the Ark is not only its legendary power, but the way its story has transcended cultures and centuries. Its shadow reaches far beyond Judaism. It appears in Christian texts, is mentioned in the Quran, and has been reimagined in film, literature, art, and even politics. It has been attributed supernatural powers, but also a real and lasting influence on the trajectory of history. For many, its disappearance is a symbol of spiritual exile, of the veil that separates the visible from the eternal. And while the Ark remains hidden or lost or destroyed, or perhaps closer than we imagine, its legend only grows stronger. In a world saturated with rational explanations, omnipresent technology, and manufactured certainties, the idea of such an object, impossible to locate, impossible to control, reminds us that there are still things we do not understand. mysteries that will not be captured. It is also a mirror. The Ark of the Covenant, beyond its material form, embodies the concept of sacred bond, of something to be respected, guarded, revered. In a society that desacralizes everything, its absence rings like a silent warning. Perhaps that is why we continue to search for it. Perhaps that is why we want to believe it is still out there, buried, sealed, waiting. Some say that if it were found, everything would change, that it would restore balance, bring divine signs, end centuries of religious division. Others fear the opposite, that its appearance would ignite a new era of conflict, of fanaticism, of claims no one could control. One way or another, the Ark of the Covenant remains a present absence, a living paradox, and perhaps that is its true power, that its disappearance has not stripped it of meaning but magnified it. Because that which cannot be found, which cannot be possessed, acquires a different kind of eternity. One that lives in memory, in faith, in symbol. One that continues to travel with us, even if we may never touch it. The secret chamber of Cleopatra. Somewhere in the Egypt that sleeps beneath centuries of sand, among temples worn down by wind and the patient waters of the Nile that move with the rhythm of the ancient gods, lies, so it is believed, a hidden chamber. A room never seen by archaeologists nor disturbed by looters, yet alive in the imagination of the world. The tomb of Cleopatra, the last queen of ancient Egypt, and within it, the secret chamber said to hold not only unimaginable treasures, but truths sealed with pride, pain, and the fate of an empire. Cleopatra VII was not a minor figure in history. She was a queen, a strategist, a lover of emperors, cultured and politically sharp in a world overflowing with violence and ambition. Her life was surrounded by art, power, and conflict, and her death, according to Roman accounts, marked by drama and silence. It is said that, following her defeat at the hands of Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, she took her own life in Alexandria, refusing to be paraded through Rome in humiliation. But what happened to her body after that final act remains, to this day, a mystery that defies generations. For centuries, many believed that Cleopatra was buried alongside Mark Antony, her greatest ally and final love. Tradition holds that the two requested to be buried together, as a symbol of a union that would extend beyond death. However, while ancient sources suggest this, none of them reveal the tomb's exact location. Plutarch, in his Parallel Lives, mentions that Octavian ordered them to be buried in the same tomb, but does not state where it was. Was it a genuine gesture, or merely an elegant way to close an inconvenient chapter? Was that wish truly fulfilled, or left behind in the polished language of Roman propaganda? The search for this secret chamber has taken unexpected turns. For a long time, it was assumed that the tomb must be in Alexandria, the city Cleopatra had turned into her center of power and brilliance, a city of libraries, gardens, and knowledge, now partially claimed by the sea and fractured by earthquakes. The ruins still visible today offer scattered clues, fragments of statues, columns rising from the water like ghosts, but never a definitive sign. In recent years, attention has shifted to other, less obvious locations. One of the sites gaining traction is Taposiris Magna, located around 40 kilometers west of Alexandria. There, amid broken walls and forgotten corridors, excavations have uncovered coins bearing Cleopatra's image, Osiris statuettes, and the mummified remains of high-ranking individuals. Archaeologist Kathleen Martinez has spent years digging at this site, convinced that the queen's tomb might lie here. Her hypothesis is not just romantic, it is strategic. Cleopatra strongly identified with the goddess Isis, and Taposiris Magna was a temple dedicated to her. To be buried there would not only be symbolic but also a clever way to hide from Roman reach. Because we are not speaking merely of a tomb, but of a secret chamber, a room sealed by deliberate intent, designed never to be found. Ancient Egypt was a master of concealing what needed to be protected, not only for fear of plunder, but because it was believed that certain knowledge and rituals were meant to remain beyond the world of the living. If this chamber does exist, it would contain more than gold and gemstones. It would hold texts, offerings, ritual objects, Perhaps even an explanation of how Cleopatra viewed her place in history, how she wished to be remembered, or how she hoped to transcend it. The obsession with this tomb is not just about the allure of treasure. Cleopatra represents a figure full of contradictions, powerful and tragic, adored and maligned, real and mythical. Rome wrote most of the accounts we know of her, holding the pen of the victor. Her tomb, if ever discovered intact, could contradict centuries of interpretation and allow an Egyptian voice, long silenced by imperial narrative, to finally speak. Perhaps there lies the true Cleopatra, not the dangerous seductress painted by her enemies, nor the impossible goddess dreamed up by modern romantics, but a woman of ambition, of fear, of vision, watching a collapsing world from within. There is something deeply human about this search. It's not only about history, it's about identity. Finding Cleopatra's secret chamber would, in some sense, mean recovering a piece of memory that time has tried to erase. It would be a revelation not just for archaeology, but for symbolism. The last queen of Egypt, still waiting to be discovered, still defying oblivion. And still silence persists. Each excavation yields new questions. Each discovery opens possibilities but also uncertainties. The stones whisper, the fragments scatter like puzzle pieces without a model. The chamber remains hidden, if it ever existed at all. Or perhaps it was already looted, destroyed, or lost forever. Yet the absence of an answer has not stopped the search. On the contrary, it has fueled it. Because what remains unfound, what resists revelation, exerts a force few can resist. And Cleopatra, even from within her mystery, from the shadow of her secret chamber, still reigns over the world's imagination. Her story, open, unfinished, suspended in time, reminds us that not every secret is meant to be solved. Some live on precisely because they refuse to be revealed. The treasure of the Templars. In the shadowy corridors of medieval history, where faith and power, crusades and secrecy intertwine, emerges an order cloaked in mystery and legend, the Knights Templar. No other name conjures such an abundance of speculation, theories, and hidden imagery as theirs. And within the rich symbolism that surrounds them lies a riddle that refuses to be erased. A mystery that has outlived the fall of kings, the silence of centuries, and the verdicts of time. The lost treasure of the Templars. It is not merely gold that is sought. It is something deeper, the key to a past that was carefully concealed, perhaps out of necessity, perhaps out of fear. The Order of the Templars was founded in the 12th century, in the context of the Crusades. It was a religious and military brotherhood, composed of monks and knights who took vows of obedience, chastity, and poverty, but who also wielded swords and oversaw trade routes, castles, and immense wealth. Their original mission was to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, but over time they became bankers, administrators, and strategists. The order held lands across Europe, operated a vast logistical network, and rose to a level of power that began to unsettle even the most prominent thrones. The suspicion surrounding their downfall stems precisely from the suddenness with which it occurred. In the year 1307, pressured by debts owed to the order, King Philip IV of France launched a massive persecution. On Friday, the 13th of October, a date that still lingers in modern superstition, hundreds of Templars were arrested throughout the kingdom. They were accused of heresy, idol worship, sodomy, and other infamous crimes. Under torture, some confessed, others died in silence. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned alive in the year 1314, and with his death, the order was officially dissolved. But no trace was ever found of the treasure they had allegedly amassed over 2 centuries. That is where the legend begins. Because the Templars were not a common army, and their wealth was not merely physical. They possessed documents, seals, relics, codices, and valuable knowledge about routes, alliances, state secrets, and possibly esoteric teachings. It is believed that before their arrest, they succeeded in hiding much of their treasure. Some chronicles claim that on the night before the mass arrests, secret caravans left Paris carrying chests, manuscripts, and sacred symbols. They were never seen again, Since then, their trail has been followed across Europe. In Scotland, it is said that some Templars escaped and found refuge, perhaps even contributing to the eventual creation of certain secret societies. In Portugal, the order was re-established under the name Order of Christ, bearing a new identity but retaining similar structures, suggesting that they never truly vanished. In Jerusalem, the underground chambers beneath the Temple of Solomon are believed to be the origin of many of their secrets, fueling the theory that their treasure had both spiritual and material dimensions. There has been no shortage of obsessive searches, from makeshift digs in French abbeys to technologically aided explorations in remote landscapes, from numerological theories to hidden symbolism and reinterpretations of ancient maps. Each generation brings new zeal. On Oak Island in Canada, many believe part of the treasure was buried there, brought by the Templars or their successors. The idea may sound far-fetched, but the enduring mystery of that island and its engineered tunnels has sustained speculation for decades. And yet, beyond the gold, what truly stirs the imagination of those who follow the Templar trail is the possibility that they hid something capable of rewriting accepted history. A document that would upend the foundations of church authority? A truth that religious dogma could not accommodate? A relic so powerful it would force a reckoning with faith itself? These questions merge with legends of the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, the Forbidden Gospels. Everything that doesn't fit neatly into official history often finds shelter in the myth of the Templars. But the greatness of this enigma lies not only in what may have once existed, but in what it has generated. The treasure of the Templars, though never found, has given rise to a vast cultural legacy. From novels to films, from esoteric treatises to modern conspiracy theories, the void left by the Templars has been filled with imagination, suspicion, devotion, and doubt. In that sense, their legacy is far richer than any chest of ancient coins. Moreover, the silence of official history contributes to their mystique. The Church took centuries to reconcile its own role in the persecution. Many documents vanished. Others were redacted. The figure of Jacques de Molay became a symbol of injustice, and his supposed curse, uttered as he burned, upon King Philip and Pope Clement V became legendary when both died shortly afterward. Even in their downfall, the Templars remained dangerous. Perhaps the most fascinating thing is that, in a way, they achieved what many desire, to escape oblivion. Though their castles were looted, their archives destroyed, and their names stricken from official records, their memory endured. And if the physical treasure has vanished, their symbolic legacy remains untouched. The treasure of the Templars is, at its core, a metaphor. It represents what is feared and what is longed for, what was meant to be silenced and what refuses to be buried. It is the inheritance of a time when the sacred and the political were entwined, when faith and power spoke the same language. A time when to hide an object was to protect a truth. Perhaps, if that treasure were ever discovered, the world wouldn't know what to do with it. Because what we seek in those buried chests is not simply wealth, but meaning. We search for answers we don't even know how to articulate. We search for the echo of a story that has yet to be fully told. And so, among the crumbling walls of forgotten fortresses, through dusty archives and maps that no longer lead anywhere, the legend of the Templar treasure continues. It is not where we expect, nor when we expect it. But perhaps it has always been there, not as an object but as a question. The spear of destiny. Deep within the Western imagination, there are objects that do more than symbolize power, they seem to contain it. Among them, sacred, feared, and endlessly sought after, stands the spear of destiny, also known as the Holy Lance, the spear of Longinus, or the weapon that allegedly decided the fate of empires. This object, humble in appearance, carries with it a myth that stretches across centuries, echoing through time with unwavering intensity, woven with threads of belief, ambition, and awe. According to Christian tradition, it was a Roman soldier named Longinus who first wielded the lance in the act that would ignite its legend. He pierced the side of Jesus Christ as he hung on the cross. What was once a tool of brutality was, in that moment, transformed. The lance, soaked in divine blood, ceased to be an ordinary weapon and became a sacred relic, an object not only of reverence, but of supernatural potential. Over time, that blood, according to various accounts, did not only sanctify the object, it imbued it with extraordinary power. The myth took root early in the medieval world. Kings, emperors, and warlords came to believe that possession of the lance might tip the scales of destiny. It was more than a relic. It was a talisman, a divine key to earthly triumph. So began the story of the lance, not one of quiet worship, but of battles, crusades, and obsessions. It was said to bring victory to its bearer, to confer divine right and legitimacy. As it passed through the hands of history's great conquerors, it disappeared and re-emerged like a ghost in the margins of recorded time, always just out of reach, always cloaked in shadow. Among those said to have held the lance, one name stands above the rest: Charlemagne. The legend claims he never lost a battle as long as he carried the spear, and when it slipped from his grip, he too fell, as though his fate had been written not in the stars, but in iron. Later, the spear would be borne by Frederick Barbarossa, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, who also believed his power rested partly in that artifact. For these men, the lance was not simply a holy relic, it was a direct line to divine authority. But time, ever the great eroder of certainty, began to obscure the lance's path. Multiple versions appeared throughout Europe. Some claimed it was held in Rome, others in Paris, some in Krakow or Armenia. Eventually, one of the most renowned versions would come to rest in Vienna, at the Hofburg Palace. Scholars and mystics, skeptics and believers, all began to ask the same question. Which one was real? Or perhaps more intriguingly, was there ever a real lance at all? Could it be that the idea was so powerful, so essential to the human spirit, that it needed to manifest itself in multiple places at multiple times? In the 20th century, the legend took a far darker turn. A young Adolf Hitler, living in Vienna, is said to have spent hours gazing at the lance displayed in the Hofburg Museum, enthralled by its history and aura. He believed, as so many before him had, that the artifact held the secret to domination. Decades later, once he had risen to power, he had the lance seized and taken to Nuremberg, where it was guarded like a sacred treasure, an occult weapon cloaked in iron and mythology. Then came a moment so striking that even the most rational minds hesitate. On the 30th of April, 1945, the very day Allied forces took possession of the lance, Hitler ended his life in his Berlin bunker. Coincidence, perhaps, yet to many, it seemed the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. He who loses the lance loses his destiny. Whether one believes in such fate or not, the symbol had become inseparable from history. After the war, the lance was returned to Vienna, where it remains to this day, encased in glass, watched over by time. Yet doubts persist. Many believe that the item housed in the Hofburg is not the original. Others believe there never was a true original at all. The real spear, some say, may have been lost forever or was never found in the first place. But perhaps that is the true essence of the story. The spear is not merely an object. It is an idea. A thought so potent it has gripped the minds of rulers and dreamers alike. It has inspired medieval manuscripts, oil paintings, literature, films, and games. It lives on in pop culture, in sacred texts, in whispered theories passed through generations. And what a symbol it is, not just of violence, but of the boundary between mortal and divine. A weapon that pierced sacred flesh, forever blurring the line between history and myth, between brutality and salvation. The lance stands as a testament to the presence of force at the heart of faith, to the idea that even in the holiest of moments, violence has left its mark. Historians have traced its journey. Scientists have studied its fragments. Theologians have debated its meaning. But the truth has never been found. The mystery persists. The more it is challenged, the stronger it becomes. With each failed attempt to prove or disprove it, the myth grows deeper roots in the collective imagination. It has, in this way, become immortal. Perhaps that is its truest form of power. Not to be found, not to be possessed, but to continue inspiring the search. To remain just beyond reach, luring explorers, historians, and believers alike into the endless pursuit of the unattainable. It is not the certainty of the spear's existence that gives it strength. It is the mystery. And so, the spear of destiny continues its silent journey, no longer in the hands of emperors and tyrants, but moving through the shadows of thought and story. Sometimes it appears in a quiet museum hall, other times in an old manuscript's curling script. Sometimes in the eyes of those who still believe, who still wonder, who still chase after something more. Because in the end, the spear does not need to be real in order to be true. Its destiny, perhaps, is not to be held, but to be dreamed of. Not to be claimed, but to remain forever elusive. The Treasure of Moctezuma. There are legends that pulse beneath the surface of history like glowing embers, waiting for the breath of memory to blaze again. Among them, few possess the feverish intensity of Moctezuma's treasure, a phantom relic of a lost empire, the golden echo of a civilization violently and greedily torn from time. It is not merely buried gold or jewels forgotten beneath the earth. The treasure of the Aztecs represents something far deeper. It is the open scar of a continent, the silent legacy of a devastated people, and the persistent symbol of what was never returned. It all begins in the pulsating heart of Tenochtitlan, the lake city that astonished the Spanish conquerors with its complexity, its beauty, and its almost mythical scale. There reigned Moctezuma II, the last great emperor of the Mexica Empire, a man schooled in the mysteries of the cosmos, surrounded by priests, astronomers, warriors, and a bureaucracy that administered a vast and disciplined realm. Moctezuma did not rule by brute force, but through an authority that seemed to emanate from the gods, from tradition, and from the blood of his ancestors. But in the year 1519, that ceremonial harmony was pierced by the steel forged across the ocean. Hernán Cortés, driven by ambition, curiosity, and a near-delirious vision of a new world to conquer, arrived on the shores of what is now Mexico with barely a few hundred men. What they found left them breathless. Bustling markets, canals that crossed the city like liquid arteries, temples rising like artificial mountains, and above all, gold. So much gold that the eyes did not know where to rest. Cortés understood at once that that brilliance meant more than mere wealth. It represented power, yes, but also superstition, faith, and dominion. Soon, relations with Moctezuma became ambiguous, poisoned by forced diplomacy, mutual betrayals, and deep misunderstandings between two worlds that had never met face to face. Official history tells that Moctezuma was taken hostage inside his own palace, that he was humiliated, manipulated, used as a shield while his empire began to falter from within. And it is then that the myth of the treasure begins to take shape. It is said that, in the face of growing tensions with the Spaniards and the obvious risk of his empire falling, Moctezuma or his closest advisors ordered the sacred treasure of the Mexica to be hidden. It was not a simple booty, but the most prized objects of the realm. Jade masks, necklaces of exotic feathers and gold, ritual vessels, codices of ancestral wisdom, ceremonial weapons, and offerings that had been gathered for generations to honor the gods of sun and rain. The order was clear. Conceal it where not even the white men, with their horses and cannons, could ever find it. Some claim it was transported through secret tunnels to the mountains. Others assert that it was submerged in the depths of Lake Texcoco, wrapped in nets of stone and clay. Some even suggest it was taken to remote regions in the north, beyond the empire's borders, entrusted to allied peoples to guard until a better time arrived. But that time never came. When the Spaniards fled Tenochtitlan during the Night of Sorrows, defeated by a fierce rebellion that reminded them the conquest would not be as swift as they had hoped, they are said to have tried to carry off part of the treasure. Trapped on the narrow causeways over the lake, burdened with gold, they were decimated. Many drowned, dragged down by the weight of the riches they sought to steal. Some chronicles speak of sunken chests, of soldiers found dead with ingots between their teeth, of jewels floating in the blood. Later, when they returned and utterly destroyed the city, when its temples were torn down and a new capital rose over its ruins, the gold still failed to appear. Cortés wrote letters to the King of Spain complaining about the meager rewards found. Years later, when the crown demanded accounts and riches, the quantities did not match the promises of a golden empire. And the myth grew. Where was the true treasure of Moctezuma? Ever since, entire generations have sought that treasure as if it were a lost key capable of opening the soul of a continent. In viceregal times, secret expeditions ventured into forests and mountains, guided by false maps and fractured testimonies. In the 19th century, American explorers arrived in northern Mexico with the firm conviction that the gold lay dormant in some sealed cave. In the 20th century, even academically credentialed archaeologists organized official searches, tracing local legends and fragments of oral history. But the most fascinating thing about Moctezuma's treasure is not its tireless pursuit, but what it represents. It is the symbol of a civilization that, despite having been conquered, was never fully defeated. It is the reminder that beneath the dust of official history lie buried truths, silenced narratives, versions that have not been told. The treasure is not only physical. It is cultural, spiritual, ancestral, and its disappearance leaves not only a void of riches, but a gap in the profound understanding of ancient Mexico. For the descendants of the indigenous peoples, the legend of the treasure has a different tone. It is not a fantasy of conquest, but a tale of resistance. Every buried ingot, every hidden mask, every vanished codex is an act of dignity against the invader, a refusal to exchange the soul for mere survival, a way of saying, the most valuable thing we possess will not be corrupted. Today, Moctezuma's treasure remains unclaimed. Isolated pieces have been found, yes, jewels that may have been part of the scattered spoils, but never the monumental ensemble described in the legends. And yet the myth endures. In documentaries, in books, in the whispers of those who claim to have seen an ancient map in a forgotten house. In the dreams of those who believe that, one day, the earth will return what history sought to bury. Perhaps, deep down, the treasure does not need to be found. Perhaps its power lies precisely in its absence, in its quality as an unfulfilled promise, in its ability to make us imagine a past that was far more complex, brilliant, and tragic than we were ever told. Because as long as we continue to seek Moctezuma's gold, we will also continue to seek the lost roots of our identity. And that search, more than any ingot, is the true treasure. The treasure of the Incas, high in the Andes, where the air grows thinner and the skies seem to brush eternity. There existed an empire as vast as it was organized, as spiritual as it was pragmatic, as connected to the earth as to the heavens. The Tawantinsuyo, known today as the Inca Empire, spanned mountains, jungles, valleys, and deserts, uniting millions of people under a single sun, the god Inti, whose radiance not only illuminated their worldview but manifested in gold, in symbols, in sacred structures, in power, and in destiny. Of all the mysteries left by this extraordinary civilization, the brightest and most elusive is undoubtedly its lost treasure, known as the Sun of the Incas. It was not a single object, nor a haphazard accumulation of buried bars. This treasure was a majestic ensemble of riches built around the Incas' ceremonial gold. More than economic wealth, this gold represented the very body of the solar deity. It was revered, not traded. It was crafted into discs, figures, masks, and sheets that covered entire walls. In the Coricancha, the Golden Temple of Cusco, the spiritual heart of the empire, there stood a monumental disc depicting the sun in all its glory. At dawn, the rays fell directly onto its polished surface, filling the temple with an incandescent light that transformed stone into fire. That disc was not an ornament. It was the deity made flesh. But when the Spaniards arrived, driven by insatiable thirst and promises of evangelization, they saw something very different in that gold. They did not see a symbol or a sacred manifestation. They saw metal, they saw wealth, and with it they saw power. Hernando Pizarro, brother of the conqueror Francisco Pizarro, was astonished when he first beheld the temple's riches. It was, he said, as if everything were made of pure gold. The walls, the gardens, the idols, even the corn cobs and the llamas. It was not a myth but a tangible, blazing, unfathomable reality. And they decided to seize it. The fall of the Incas was swift, though not without resistance. The capture of Emperor Atahualpa marked a decisive turning point. In Cajamarca, prisoner and bewildered, the sovereign offered to fill an entire room with gold in exchange for his freedom. Chroniclers recorded that more than 6 tons of gold and silver arrived in caravans from across the empire. They melted it down, they weighed it, they shipped it to Spain. And when the last item was delivered, Atahualpa was executed without honor or word. What followed was the systematic dismantling of the empire, and with it, the scattering of its deepest secrets. Yet the legend of the true treasure, the son of the Incas, does not lie in the tons that crossed the sea, nor in the bars that filled the coffers of the crown. According to accounts, before the Spaniards consolidated their rule, a crucial portion of the sacred gold was hidden by priests and loyalists of the royal family. They knew the gold must not fall into profane hands. They concealed it, they say, in the bowels of the mountains, in lagoons invisible from afar, in caves sealed with earth, stone, and silence. Some even believe it was taken to a secret city beyond the jungle, where it was kept safe until it vanished from written history. This idea of a lost city, a second Inca capital guarding the divine treasure, has fueled centuries of expeditions. From the 17th century to today, travelers, military men, fortune seekers, and archaeologists have ventured into the least accessible regions of Peru and neighboring countries in search of Paititi, a mythical enclave said to be both a political refuge and a secret vault. The quest has claimed lives, spawned fake maps, inspired mysterious documents, and yet also pushed the boundaries of modern exploration. One particularly powerful story is that of Father Andrés López, a Jesuit missionary who claimed to have visited Paititi in the 17th century. His report described a city hidden among mountains, with columns of gold, gigantic statues, and a central altar that shone like a true sun. The report was sent to the Vatican but never made public. Some believe it was suppressed, others that it was ignored out of incredulity. Yet the document exists and has sparked numerous theories connecting the lost city to the vanished treasure of the Incas. And though many have failed in the search, scattered archaeological finds hint that beyond the myth there is a reality not yet fully revealed. Deep in the jungle of Madre de Dios, in areas untouched by modern technology, remains of structures, stone roads overgrown by vegetation, and fragments of pottery have emerged. Signs that something significant stood there and perhaps still remains buried beneath centuries of foliage and silence. What is remarkable is that over time the treasure has ceased to be merely a collection of lost objects. It has become a symbol of an incomplete history, of a halted memory. The son of the Incas is not just the stolen gold, but the fragmented identity of a culture that was stripped bare yet resisted. The gold now stands for not only material value, but knowledge, worldview, astronomical expertise, engineering, art, and poetry. What was lost was not only an empire but a way of understanding the world. Today, the myth still pulses. Modern explorers continue to penetrate the Amazon, the secret valleys of Cusco, and the high mountain ranges where communities still live on, preserving their ancestors' tales like prayers. They do not seek treasure to enrich themselves, but to uncover a chapter left unwritten. Often they find more questions than answers, but that does not deter them. For in every carved stone, every petroglyph, every golden thread peeking from the mud, there is a vestige of what once was and perhaps still waits to be found. Perhaps the son of the Incas eludes discovery because its time has not yet come. Perhaps its finding is not a destination but a process. Or perhaps, as in so many other stories humanity refuses to forget, the greatest treasure is not what is unearthed, but what continues to be sought. The Library of Alexandria, on the shores of the Mediterranean, where the sea has lapped at the stones with the same rhythm for millennia, stood a city that aspired to contain all the world's knowledge. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great and soon the intellectual jewel of the ancient world, was for centuries more than merely a port or a metropolis. It was a beacon, not only the physical lighthouse that illuminated the waters from the island of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, but also a beacon of thought, a torch lit by human curiosity. And at the heart of that city, like a hidden sun behind marble walls, beat the most ambitious enterprise of knowledge ever conceived, the Great Library of Alexandria. So much has been written about it that distinguishing history from legend has become, in a sense, unnecessary. Simply invoking its name conjures images of endless corridors filled with papyrus scrolls and scholars from every part of the ancient world debating in Greek, ancient Egyptian, and Aramaic, as if language alone could shatter the boundaries of understanding. It was an unprecedented institution, not merely a place to store books, but a space dedicated to the totality of human knowledge. Its ambition was encyclopedic, comprehensive, almost divine. Likely founded in the 3rd century before our era under Ptolemy I or his son Ptolemy II, the library was never meant as an architectural spectacle or mere text repository. It sprang from a far grander idea: to collect, translate, and preserve every book in existence. To this end, the Ptolemies spared no expense. Every ship that docked in the port was recorded, and if scrolls were among its cargo, they were copied or directly seized to join the collection. The copies were returned. The originals often were not. It is not known for certain how many volumes it held. Some speak of 400,000. Others venture more than 700,000 papyrus rolls resting on its shelves. The exact number matters less than the intent: to compile all human thought up to that point, regardless of language, religion, or origin. There the works of Homer and Sophocles were preserved, alongside medical treatises from India, Babylonian cosmologies, Persian philosophical texts, Egyptian codices, and African knowledge now entirely lost. The Library of Alexandria was not an isolated tower. It formed part of a larger complex. The Museion, an institution devoted to the arts and sciences that functioned like a proto-academic university. Mathematicians, astronomers, poets, historians, and physicians lived and worked there. It was a crucible of theories, a space of ceaseless creation. The decimal system, advanced geometry, the first calculations of the Earth's circumference, theories on planetary motion, and anatomical treatises were conceived or perfected in its halls. One of the most celebrated names associated with the library is Hypatia of Alexandria, philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer of the 4th century after Christ, who symbolizes the dramatic twilight of that mythical place. Trained in the Neoplatonic tradition, she taught in the streets and halls of Alexandria, embodying reason in the face of fanaticism. Her tragic death, murdered by a Christian mob that saw her as a threat to their doctrine, is often taken as the symbol of the definitive end of an era, the fall of free thought under the weight of orthodoxy. But the true end of the library is even more diffuse than its origin. It did not perish in a single fire, as legend often suggests. It was not destroyed in one violent act. Its disappearance was gradual, complex, and stretched over centuries. It suffered damage under Roman rule, especially during the civil wars. Julius Caesar, in his conflict with Pompey, set fire to the harbor fleet, and that blaze may have spread to nearby manuscript repositories. Later, the emerging Christian movement, with its iconoclastic fervor, closed or repurposed many centers deemed pagan. Finally, the arrival of Islam did not uniformly protect what remained, although some caliphs did preserve certain works. Thus, the Library of Alexandria did not burn at once but vanished as a language dies or a dream fades, through successive episodes of forgetting, institutional neglect, and the indifferent passage of time. The most painful fact is that no comprehensive catalog has survived. We do not know for certain what it contained or how much was lost. It is as if entire chapters of human history were erased without leaving a trace. And yet its echo still resonates. The Library of Alexandria has become a modern obsession, not only for what it was, but for what it might have been. Its spirit lives on in every global digitization project, every open-access archive, and every effort to democratize knowledge. Google, Wikipedia, open-access libraries. They are all, in a sense, distant heirs of that lost collection. For Alexandria's dream was not power, but understanding. Not exclusivity, but wholeness. Its ambition was not for an elite, but for an entire civilization striving to comprehend the world. The rediscovery of its legacy even inspired symbolic reconstructions. In the year 2002, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina was inaugurated in Egypt, a contemporary attempt to revive that spirit. The modern building, with its open architecture, does not seek to replicate the ancient library but to honor it. It reminds every visitor that knowledge can be destroyed, but it can also be reborn. Because, in the end, the Library of Alexandria is not a concrete place. It is an idea, promise, a reminder of what we are capable of imagining when we do not fear the unknown. And the most astonishing thing is that, although its walls no longer stand, its light still reaches us. The Treasure of Oak Island. Off the coast of Nova Scotia in Canada lies a small island covered in oaks and mist, at first glance as ordinary as any other green spot on the Atlantic map. Its silhouette lacks the drama of Irish cliffs and the lush tropics of Pacific atolls. It is modest, silent, almost austere. Yet for over 2 centuries, Oak Island, the Island of Oaks, has guarded an enigma that has defied logic, swallowed fortunes, claimed lives, and fueled a collective obsession that shows no sign of fading with time. They say that deep within lies one of the world's most enigmatic and elusive treasures. It all began in 1795, when a young farmer named Daniel McGinnis, exploring the island's woods, discovered a circular hollow ringed by stones and unusually turned earth. Intrigued by what seemed a man-made depression, he returned with 2 friends and they began to dig. A little over a meter down, they found a platform of stones. Lower still, layers of perfectly aligned logs. Another and another. Every 3 meters, a new timber layer. What they had uncovered was not a simple pit, but the entrance to a shaft excavated with startling precision. Thus was born the legend of the Money Pit. With each new expedition and each meter of descent, the mystery deepened. At 20 meters, workers found a flat stone inscribed with cryptic text. It allegedly read, 40 feet shall be found 2 million pounds buried. No one can confirm the exact inscription, or even if that stone truly existed, but the very story ignited imaginations. What first seemed a minor hiding place took on mythical proportions. Tunnels, sealed chambers, hydraulic traps, hidden platforms. Everything pointed to a design by skilled minds, possibly centuries old. But the mystery did not end with the promise of gold. When diggers tried to go further, the shaft suddenly flooded with seawater. As if someone had built a natural defense mechanism to prevent reaching the heart of the puzzle. Valves, secret channels, engineered inlets of pre-modern ingenuity. The dense, dark water sealed the pit and halted progress. Attempts to drain, divert, or bore sideways all failed, met by the island's stubborn resistance as if it refused to reveal its secret. Since then, generations have tried to solve Oak Island's riddle. Private companies, adventurers, eccentric millionaires, engineers, geologists, and treasure hunters have poured time and money into exploration. Throughout the 19th century, companies were formed solely to excavate. Pumps, auxiliary tunnels, drills, and ever more sophisticated machinery were deployed. But whenever the truth seemed within reach, the island closed ranks again, like a shy flower that opens only to the moon and never to humans. Among the seekers stand legendary figures like Franklin D. Roosevelt, long before his presidency, who stayed informed of every new expedition throughout his life. More recently, brothers Rick and Marty Lagina, stars of a famous television series, have dedicated years of effort, millions of dollars, and cutting-edge technology to survey the terrain. And although they have uncovered fascinating artifacts, chain fragments, decayed manuscripts, ancient timbers, nails, scattered coins, the heart of the mystery remains beyond reach. What, then, is really there? The theories multiply like branches on an ancient tree. Some speak of a Templar treasure, smuggled from Europe after the fall of the Knights Templar and hidden by monks or knights crossing the Atlantic covertly. Others suggest pirate booty, perhaps buried by the notorious Captain Kidd or even Blackbeard. There are claims of the Holy Grail, lost Shakespearean manuscripts, or secret documents that could upend the established narrative of Western history. Beyond speculation, some plausible, others veering into esoteric delirium, the underground construction on Oak Island is real. The complexity of the flood tunnels, the precision of the timber platforms, the apparent existence of hidden chambers at varying depths all point to a deliberate, monumental design. This was no improvised dig. It was a vast enterprise meant to withstand not years but centuries. Most intriguing is that with every discovery, the mystery deepens rather than dissolves. a 16th century Spanish coin, a ring bearing Masonic symbols, parchment fragments written with European ink, timbers dated to long before North America was colonized. As if the island were a palimpsest, layered civilizations concealing the final clue beneath each other. But perhaps Oak Island's true value lies not only within but without. In the relentless human quest, the century-spanning dialogue, the dance between science, myth, and desire. For if this story shows anything, it is that humanity's drive to uncover, to understand, and to conquer the unknown can be as powerful as gold itself. The island has become a living metaphor for longing, a mirror reflecting our deepest obsessions. The unyielding urge to find answers, to never give up, to believe that beyond mud and stone something awaits discovery. Today, more than 200 years after the first dig, the money pit endures, surrounded by modern machinery, television cameras, and cutting-edge technology. Yet it is also shrouded in silence, in respect, in mystery, in that unmistakable feeling that the earth only reveals its secrets when it wills. Perhaps the treasure of Oak Island will never be found, or perhaps it has already been unearthed, and the true puzzle is why we continue to dig. But as long as there are those willing to shovel, to decipher, to dream, the island will remain more than a piece of land. It will remain a symbol, a riddle, promise, and in that promise lies all its power. The Treasure of Yamashita. As the Second World War drew to a close in the Pacific and Allied forces relentlessly swept through islands and archipelagos, a colossal operation was unfolding in the shadows, an operation that, had it been precisely recorded, would hold a central place among the great plunderings of the 20th century. At its heart lies a name synonymous with mystery, greed, and silence. General Tomoyuki Yamashita. Dubbed the Tiger of Malaya for his swift campaigns across Southeast Asia, Yamashita's forces seized unimaginable wealth. Gold bullion, ancient jewels, Buddhist relics, statues, coins, and artworks looted from temples, banks, museums, and elite residences in occupied territories such as Malaysia, Burma, Singapore, and the Philippines. The booty's sheer scale demanded an entire logistics network to transport, catalog, and, most importantly, hide it. The plan was simple. As the empire's collapse loomed, these treasures would be concealed in secure locations in the Philippines, caves and tunnels protected by jungle and secrecy, intended to fund a possible resurgence of Japanese power or serve as a silent legacy for a doomed cause. Limestone caverns and abandoned mines offered ideal shelter. Passages were carved, chambers reinforced with concrete, traps set, explosives primed, and airtight seals installed. Everything was engineered to withstand decades, even centuries. In the war's aftermath, whispers circulated of secret maps and hidden reports. Some say Emperor Hirohito personally endorsed the cover-up. Prisoners of war and forced laborers reportedly built these hideouts, many being killed afterward to safeguard the secret. Estimates of the treasure's value soar beyond $100 billion by today's standards. For years, Yamashita's treasure remained little more than a whispered rumor until 1971, when Filipino treasure hunter Rogelio Roxas claimed to have found one sealed chamber containing a solid gold Buddha and bars he attributed to the legendary hoard. Marcos's forces quickly arrested him, beat him, and confiscated his finds. Roxas's heirs sued in Hawaii and were awarded millions, but the exact discovery site and the confiscated treasure were never fully disclosed. Since then, the legend has gone global. Hundreds of explorers, locals and foreigners alike, have scoured Philippine jungles and mountains for signs of Japanese tunnels, collapsed shafts, or carved inscriptions. Some unearthed 1940s gunpowder, others found pre-colonial coins or wooden beams dating before North American exploration. Yet the core of the mystery still eludes them. Unlike ancient myths, Yamashita's treasure is a modern saga documented with maps, classified military aerial photographs, and signed testimonies of former soldiers. It is a living history of conspiracies, cover-ups, unsolved deaths, and state interests, where finding the treasure could rewrite a crucial chapter of recent world history, not just fill coffers. Today, in remote Philippine villages, elders still share nighttime tales of buried chests, echoes of blasts, and spirits guarding golden hoards. Many insist there are not one but dozens of secret stashes scattered across the archipelago, awaiting the right seeker at the right moment. But nature is unforgiving. Dense jungle, vanishing trails, and tropical storms erase tracks as fast as they appear. And danger is real, not only from the wild but from those determined to keep this secret buried. For 80 years, Yamashita's treasure has remained hidden, its traces barely legible in the soil. Perhaps one day an intact chamber will emerge and speak its silent testimony to the world. Or perhaps the treasure's true power lies in its unfound state, in the call echoing from the depths of gold and shadow, heard only by those willing to dig with patience, respect, and unwavering faith in memory. The treasure of the Aztecs and the Mayans, the golden city of Z. In the pulsating heart of the American continent, where the jungle becomes a living organism that breathes, lurks, protects, and devours, there has been for centuries a persistent whisper, an obsession that has traversed generations with the unyielding force of an underground river. The mystery of a golden city lost among the tangled branches of the Amazon, a hidden urban center whose existence has never been conclusively proven, yet whose presence looms more vividly than many other realities. Recorded on paper, they call it the City of Z. For some, it is the last bastion of a pre-Columbian civilization that escaped destruction. For others, it is the repository of the most astonishing treasures ever imagined in these lands. In any case, it represents something deeper, the hope that there are still untouched corners in a world that claims to have discovered everything. This city is often associated with Aztec and Mayan cultures, although geographically the search has shifted much further south, to regions where neither empire reached directly. But there is a logic that connects these worlds, an invisible line of architecture, symbolism, astronomy, and power that stretches from the temples of Palenque to the submerged ruins of Tikal, and from the pyramids of the Mexican highlands to the most unexplored areas of Brazil's Mato Grosso. A line suggesting deep cultural connections between distant peoples, united by sun worship, by the mathematical organization of space, and by the desire for transcendence that permeated every carved stone. The legend took shape in the early 20th century thanks to a man who was not an innocent dreamer but a rigorous British military officer, meticulous explorer, and relentless cartographer, Percy Harrison Fawcett. Decorated for his work in India and seasoned in maps and compasses, Fawcett became one of the last adventurers of an era that still believed in the unexplored. After several expeditions in South America, where he faced caimans, mosquitoes, fever, impenetrable jungles, and overwhelming solitude, Fawcett gathered clues, fragments of indigenous tales, ancient maps, references in forgotten codices, and above all, an unshakable conviction. Somewhere between the rivers of the Amazon and the highlands of western Brazil lay a lost city rich in gold and knowledge, erected by an advanced civilization never recorded by European chroniclers. He named it with a solitary letter, powerful and enigmatic, Z. Not by chance. For Fawcett, this Z represented not only the last point of the alphabet but also the culmination of mystery, the final destination of a quest that was both geographical and spiritual. In 1925, accompanied by his son Jack and a small group of explorers, he ventured once more into Mato Grosso. He never returned. What happened to them has given rise to hundreds of hypotheses. Ambushed by a tribe, victims of the jungle, consumed by fever, or simply absorbed by what they sought. Their disappearance turned legend into myth and bestowed upon myth an offering of blood and silence that remains unanswered. And yet the city remains. Not physically, perhaps, but certainly in the collective consciousness of those who resist accepting that mystery can be erased by pragmatism. Because Z is much more than a mere agglomeration of ruins or abandoned treasure chests. Z represents the last frontier of the possible, the symbolic space where the unfulfilled hopes of the modern world converge. In an era saturated with information, with cartographic certainties, aerial images, and global surveillance, the very idea that a corner of the earth has remained immune to technological scrutiny holds unparalleled poetic power. For centuries, indigenous peoples have spoken of hidden cities, of kingdoms that retreated deep into the jungle to escape the yoke of colonization. There are stories passed down from generation to generation, tales of sacred cities that appear and disappear, protected by spirits or camouflaged by nature itself. Many of these legends were dismissed by European explorers, treated as fables or fabrications without scientific basis. But over time, some have proven to contain a kernel of truth that challenges traditional categories of historical knowledge. In this context, the city of Z has been seen by some as a derivation or late echo of ancient Maya and Aztec cities, as if part of that knowledge had survived beyond established boundaries, hiding in the thick foliage and flourishing in secret. Some argue that Z could be an enclave where cultures mixed, where northern migrants brought their architecture, calendars, and gods with them, creating a new synthesis free from European contact and thus immune to the destruction that befell other civilizations. The obsession with Z is also fueled by another fundamental element: the presence of gold. Unlike other cultures where gold was a sign of accumulated wealth or economic power, in Mesoamerican and Andean worlds, gold had a symbolic, spiritual, cosmic function. It represented the flesh of the sun, the material manifestation of divinity. If Z exists, if it was indeed built by a culture inheriting that worldview, then it is logical to imagine that its temples were covered in gold sheets, its plazas adorned with gleaming statues, and its everyday objects as precious as they were sacred, not as ostentation but as a reflection of a higher order. Today, the jungle has devoured centuries of history, and the map of South America is dotted with nameless points and regions still undecipherable. What was once a simple legend begins to find echoes in archaeological discoveries, confirming the existence of complex Amazonian civilizations capable of modifying their environment, building urban centers, mapping road networks, and maintaining advanced agricultural systems. The narrative of Z, so discredited for decades, begins to emerge with new legitimacy driven not by fantasy but by science. But perhaps what is most revealing is understanding that even if the city of Z never existed as Fawcett imagined it, its quest has had incalculable value. Because it has forced the world to look toward a region that was ignored. It has inspired hundreds of researchers to reevaluate indigenous knowledge, and it has opened doors to new questions about America's history before European contact. And because deep down, every treasure hunt is also a form of knowledge, a way to say, there are still things we do not know. There are still paths we have not traveled. In that sense, Z remains alive. It is a city of steam and fire suspended between the jungle and desire, a utopia that does not need to be found to continue guiding those who still believe in mystery. The Treasure of Captain Kidd. On the vast stage of the 17th century seas, where merchant routes ran like open veins between continents and the winds carried whispers of fortune and ruin, the name William Kidd, or simply Captain Kidd, emerged as a figure as fascinating as he was ambiguous. He was both a privateer and later branded a pirate, executed as a public example, yet enshrined ever since in one of the most enduring legends of nautical lore. The hidden treasure buried far from human eyes, biding its time beneath the damp earth of some forgotten isle. This myth did not arise from thin air. Kidd was a real man, a Scottish seafarer whose life swung between outright crime and lawful service, between loyalty to the British crown and the irresistible lure of easy riches. Unlike many pirates who made no effort to disguise their plunder, Kidd initially sailed under a letter of marque, an official commission authorizing him to attack England's enemies, provided he adhered to maritime law. But as often happens in murky waters of power, those boundaries blurred, and before long Kidd crossed the thin line that separates hero from villain. In 1696, he set sail for the Indian Ocean aboard the adventure galley, commanding a crew of bona fide privateers and morally flexible sailors. His mission was clear: seize French vessels or ships belonging to England's enemies. Yet prizes were few, voyages were long, and the pressure from investors, some of whom held high political office, grew unbearable. In a critical moment, Kidd captured the Quebec Merchant, an Armenian trading ship laden with textiles, gold, silver, and other valuables. He insisted it flew a French flag. Britain's authorities called it outright piracy and arrested him. News of his unauthorized capture spread faster than Kidd himself. Within weeks, his name was blackened in London's drawing rooms, and those who had financed him demanded his head to save their own skins. Cornered, Kidd buried part of his loot in the Caribbean and sailed toward North America, hoping to negotiate his freedom. Instead, He was arrested in Boston and shipped back to England, where he faced a trial riddled with political manipulation and legal irregularities. Convicted of piracy, he was hanged in 1701. His body displayed in an iron cage over the Thames as a grim warning to would-be mutineers. But Kidd's death ignited his legend rather than burying it. During pre-trial interrogations, talks of hidden chests, remote islands, and cryptic maps surfaced repeatedly. Kidd's own statements fueled the belief that he'd stashed treasure somewhere between the Caribbean, New England, and the eastern coast of North America. So tangible was this rumor that, for the first time in British legal history, the existence of buried treasure was admitted as evidence in court. Since then, Captain Kidd's treasure has inflamed the imaginations of explorers, fortune hunters, and daydreamers across the globe. Searches have zeroed in on Gardiner's Island off Long Island, where Kidd allegedly entrusted part of his hoard to a friendly landowner, on Caribbean Isles, the shores of Madagascar, and even Venezuelan coastline, all in vain attempts to unearth that elusive stash. Over time, scattered rumors evolved into half-truths, which in turn formed an ever more intricate mythos. It is no longer just about ancient maps or buried chests. Kidd's treasure has become a universal symbol of desire, of gold as both curse and reward, of the voyage as a promise of redemption. Each new generation of seekers projects its own material, historical, or spiritual hopes onto this quest. In the 19th century, when Romanticism cast pirates in a heroic glow, tales emerged of gold coins washed ashore, coral-encrusted anchors, and shipwreck remains matching descriptions of the adventure galley. Bottled messages and family manuscripts hinting at ciphered coordinates stoked the fever still burning today. Modern technology, metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, drones, scans entire islands in the hunt for that precise spot where Kidd might have left his legacy. Yet the story's power lies in its irreducible uncertainty. Every absence becomes proof, every miner finds a promise. The hidden treasure, though still elusive, exerts a pull far greater than its monetary value. It is the foundational myth of modern piracy, intertwining human ambition with the ocean's eternal mystery. Even now, when cinematic and children's tales have softened the pirate's edge, Kidd's name retains an unmistakable roughness and depth. For he was no romantic rogue but a man of an era when the sea was a lawless frontier, where decisions were made with compass in one hand and cutlass in the other. His treasure, whether ever found or not, is the last vestige of that untamed age, that moment when the world was still half unmapped and legends were written in blood upon the waves. And perhaps, ultimately, that is why we keep searching. Because gold, jewels, sealed chests, and mysterious isles are merely pretexts. What we truly yearn for is the echo of our own past, the adventure we will never live, the certainty that some secrets defy every map. The treasure of El Cid Campeador. At the crossroads of history and legend, where collective memory dissolves into the mists of time, certain names shine by themselves, needing no explanation. They conjure epics, battles, honor, and exile. One such name, welded from sword strokes and eloquence, is Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, the Cid Campeador. Tireless warrior, exiled vassal, and literary hero of medieval Spain, he has become, through the centuries, the emblem of courage and cunning. Yet beyond the famous ballads and heroic feats lies a lesser-known but equally compelling chapter, the lost treasure of El Cid. This is no ordinary cache of jewels plundered in the fog of war. El Cid's treasure is the direct outcome of a life lived on the march, of military genius, and of a talent for funding himself independently of rigid feudal structures. Banished by his king, landless and penniless, Rodrigo amassed wealth through conquests, strategic pacts, and carefully apportioned spoils. With every victory he earned respect and valuable resources. Chronicles suggest his hoard rivaled that of any monarch. The traditional narrative, immortalized in the Canta de Mio Cid, portrays him as a man loyal to King Alfonso VI yet forced to live outside the law to reclaim his honor. His earnings came not just from raids, but also from voluntary tributes and negotiated alliances, often with both Muslim and Christian rulers. Unlike many of his peers, El Cid knew that power flowed as much from gold as from the sword. During his conquest of Valencia, His crowning political and military achievement, the Cid established near-sovereign rule. He governed the city with his own court, judges, scribes, and soldiers. Muslim and Christian chroniclers alike attest to the vast treasure amassed there. Chests overflowing with gold and silver coins, gem-studded arms, luxurious fabrics, ivory, manuscripts, and holy relics, testimony to years of pillage, tribute, and trade. But what became of that fortune remains unclear. After Rodrigo's death in 1099, Valencia's defenses crumbled. His widow, Jimena Diaz, held the city for over a year but ultimately fled before the Almoravid onslaught and Castilian indifference. Some accounts claim loyal retainers carried a portion of the treasure back to Castile, while a substantial share was buried outside Valencia, beneath the Albufer ramparts or in secret tunnels linking city walls to bath complexes. References to El Cid's lost riches appear as early as the 13th century. The Arab historian Ibn al-Qardabis marveled that the Almoravids found no sign of the Cid's wealth after capturing Valencia. Over the centuries, treasure hunters and archaeologists have unearthed ancient coins, ornate weapon fragments, armor pieces, and relics. Items that cannot be definitively linked to the Cid, but keep hope alive. Recent excavations at the site of the Royal Palace of Valencia, destroyed during the War of Independence, revealed underground chambers that could once have served as vaults, perhaps even once filled with El Cid's hoard. Yet El Cid's true treasure transcends material gold. It was the web of loyalties he wove across religious lines, allowing him to operate with extraordinary freedom in a rigid feudal era. Though much of his wealth may have vanished, looted, or buried, his enduring legacy lies in the power he derived from alliances and economic influence, without ever holding a crown. Today his legend lives on in statues, plazas, poems, and films, and the dream of uncovering his treasure, that, somewhere in eastern Spain, under centuries of dust, a piece of his legacy awaits, remains as irresistible as the saga itself. Amid ruined towers, buried ramparts, and fragile parchment, the lost treasure of El Cid Campeador endures. An open wound in Iberian history, a promise yet unfulfilled, one missing piece of the Reconquista's grand puzzle. Gold may tarnish and swords may break, but stories like this defy time, and El Cid's is one for the ages. The treasure of the Incas, Pizarro's last treasure. On the high plateaus of ancient Peru, where the sun rests with almost religious gravity upon the carved stones of a vanished empire, the echo of a monumental betrayal still lingers, a historical fracture that forever changed the fate of a continent. The encounter of two worlds, the Spanish conquerors and the Incas, was not merely a clash of cultures, but a collision of paradigms. Time, power, and value systems collided with irreconcilable force. At the heart of this upheaval gleams like an open wound the story of broken promises, boundless ambition, and a treasure that, though very real, seems to have dissolved in the smoke of time. Some say Pizarro's last treasure still lies beneath the skin of the Andes. When Francisco Pizarro first arrived in the Andean highlands in 1532, he commanded just a few hundred men and a ruthless conviction that faith, steel, and greed were enough to bend empires to his will. His fortune was the internal strife of the Tawantinsuyo. The civil war between Atahualpa and Huáscar had fractured the empire's power structures. Pizarro seized the opening. Kidnapping Atahualpa in Cajamarca was both ruthless calculation and bold political gambit. Alone and surrounded by strangers whose language sounded like iron, Atahualpa offered the unthinkable: to fill one chamber up to a marked line with gold and two more with silver in exchange for his freedom. Chroniclers recount how llamas and human caravans arrived for months from Cusco, Chimu, the highlands, and the jungle, bearing not only molten metal but exquisite, symbol-laden art pieces meant to commune with the gods. This ransom stands among history's greatest booty payments. Yet Atahualpa was executed. Official charges of heresy and conspiracy attempted to rationalize his death. But the brutal truth was that even this vast wealth could not sate the Spaniards' hunger for control. With the last Inca ruler gone, the empire fell to pieces. Cities were taken, temples plundered, idols melted down, and altars stripped. each step tearing away a fragment of a civilization that had believed in cyclical time and cosmic order. But one aspect escapes the official narrative. The promised gold never fully reached the coast. Many caravans disappeared en route. Some loads were intercepted. Others were hidden by local chiefs who, betrayed, chose concealment over surrender. Witnesses claim portions of the treasure were buried northward toward Quito, Atahualpa's former seat of power. Other testimonies speak of shipments diverted into inaccessible Andean caves, an act of covert resistance entrusted to keepers who guarded their silence with their lives. By then governor of Peru, Pizarro shipped much of the ransom to the coastal forts, had it cast into bars, and sent it to Spain. Yet not all treasures made the voyage. Fragmentary colonial records reference provisional caches and secret storerooms, meant to protect the gold from attacks by indigenous forces or rival Spaniards. As Pizarro's power rose, so did court intrigues. His fellow conquistadors, among them Diego de Almagro, fought bitterly over land, honors, and trade routes. What had been shared ambition became a minefield of betrayal. Pizarro's violent death in 1541, murdered by Almagro's supporters in his Lima palace, sealed the first chapter of Spanish rule in Peru but left many questions unanswered. Chief among them, what happened to the gold that never reached the sea? For years, colonial dispatches mention feudal treasure hunts, reports of hidden hoards, and rumors that the vice-regal court of stashes lying buried in Huancavelica's hills, Mantaro Valley's ravines, Sierra Central's gorges, or deep in the Vilcabamba jungle, final refuge of the rebellious Inca. Even among the last heirs of the Tawantinsuyo, Manco Inca and his followers, the legend of lost treasure evolved into a symbol of resistance. Some chronicle that fleeing Incas spirited away unclaimed gold not as private wealth, but as a cultural testament that their civilization had not been vanquished, only displaced. Since then, tales persist of sealed caves, passageways beneath ruined fortresses, idols hidden under lakes whose depths guard more than reflections. In the 19th century, with the rise of archaeological interest and European explorations of Latin America, new efforts sought Pizarro's final hoard. They followed Inca trails, excavated hills, and consulted colonial maps. Adventurers reported astronomical symbols carved in stone, burials with unusual offerings, caves sealed with cyclopean blocks. Yet no intact treasure chamber was ever discovered. The shadow of that treasure endures, ever shifting between myth and documented history. Today, Pizarro's so-called last treasure is more than missing objects. It is a narrative wound that still bleeds across Latin American history, a perfect metaphor for plunder, broken promises, lost knowledge, and power that merely changes hands without altering its logic. It marks the blind center of a conquest that was not only military, but also symbolic. A struggle to impose a single version of the world. Perhaps that is why the search continues. It is not merely about unearthing golden relics, but about reclaiming the thread of a story not yet fully told. Every time someone ventures into the mountains with a map or an inherited tale, they pursue not just a metal's gleam, but the hope that, amid all that was lost, something can still be found. A final vestige of a world submerged beneath the dust of time. The treasure of the Jews in the fortress of Masada. High atop a solitary promontory towering like a stone fist over the arid Dead Sea, where the desert wind slithers like an ancient beast and the sunlight seems frozen in eternity, lies Masada, a fortress carved by time and human will, emblematic of resistance and tragedy. Yet Masada also serves as the stage for one of the most enduring mysteries of the ancient world, the lost treasure of the Jewish rebels who made this mountaintop their final stronghold. Masada is more than mere ruins. It is a living scar of memory etched into its walls, in parched cisterns, on sunburned floors. Originally built by Herod the Great, the paranoid visionary who erected hanging palaces, vast storehouses, water cisterns capable of supplying hundreds for years, and nearly impregnable ramparts. Masada earned its immortal fame decades later. After the Second Temple's destruction in 70 CE, thousands of survivors fled into the Judean desert. Among them, a band of zealots known as the Sicarii, led by Eleazar ben Yair, captured the fortress and expelled its small Roman garrison. Cut off from the world, They vowed never to surrender. For 3 years they endured. While Rome's legions razed Judea, Masada burned bright as a beacon of defiance, a stubborn echo of a people refusing extinction. The defenders organized themselves meticulously, farming where they could, harvesting rainwater in cisterns, maintaining strict discipline. According to numerous sources, they brought with them the temple's last sacred treasures, golden vessels, gilded ritual objects, Torah scrolls in precious cases, oil lamps once lit in the Holy of Holies, items whose material splendor embodied the divine presence on earth. But when Governor Flavius Silva ordered Masada's final subjugation, his legions built a colossal ramp on the western slope, an engineering marvel still visible today. Rather than storm the walls directly, they advanced stone by stone, earth by earth, until the fortress walls yielded. The night before the assault in 73 CE, Josephus recounts, the roughly 900 men, women, and children decided they would not be captured alive. In a fiery speech, Eleazar urged them to choose freedom in death over slavery. Through a grim lottery, each killed their family members, then each other, until the last lit the blazing pyre and took his own life. When the Romans finally entered, they found only ashes and silence, no treasure. Since then, the question has resonated: what happened to the holy artifacts saved from Jerusalem? Were they buried in one of Masada's many natural caverns or hand-dug passages? Did any escape with a messenger before the final siege? Or do they still lie hidden beneath rock, shielded by desert sands and the indomitable will of their guardians? Archaeologists working at Masada since the 20th century have uncovered fragments of daily life, pottery shards, food remnants, coins, textile scraps, manuscript fragments, but the ritual treasure itself remains absent. That very absence fuels the belief that something was deliberately concealed. Given the Sicarii organization, it seems unlikely they did not protect their most precious relics. Masada's layout offered countless hiding places: voids within stone walls, subterranean chambers beneath storehouses, sealed wells, hidden doorways camouflaged in the rock. Some proposed the treasures were cast into empty cisterns and sealed from within, invisible to any intruder. Others argue that the true treasure was the rebels' final act, that the real value lay not in hidden gold but in their choice to extinguish their own hopes rather than submit. Perhaps the sacred vessels were burned, broken, or dispersed in final rituals intended to preserve their holiness beyond the material world. Today, Masada stands as a national symbol, a pilgrimage site, a summit where history and myth embrace without clear distinction. Yet it remains a promise unfulfilled. The crevices of its rock still guard secrets, and among archaeologists, historians, and silent treasure seekers, many believe the Second Temple's last artifacts slumber beneath that scorched earth, warded by desert winds and the unwavering resolve of those who defended them to the very end. The treasure of Masada, then, is more than a hunt for gold or sacred art. It is an inquiry into ultimate resistance, into the dignity of a people who chose death over bondage, into the possibility that tangible remnants endure of a moment when faith outweighed the sword. Though centuries have blanketed its passages and chambers in dust, the story of Masada begins anew each time the mystery persists. The treasure of the Nazis and the gold of the Third Reich. On the darkest margins of recent history, amid burned archives, vanished trains, and vaults sealed with death oaths, unfolds one of the 20th century's most enduring legends, the lost treasure of the Third Reich. It is a tale where horror, avarice, and secrecy intertwine so tightly that time itself seems to conspire to keep the final material remains of an ideology that sought to reduce the world to ashes shrouded in darkness. Although World War II ended more than 70 years ago, excavation continues, literally, for the gold the Nazis hid as Europe burned. Adolf Hitler's regime was not only an engine of war and genocide but also a meticulously organized looting machine. From the earliest days of territorial expansion, Wehrmacht units, bureaucrats, and art specialists roamed half of Europe with one mandate: confiscate, seize, expropriate. Jewish families lost homes, museum masterpieces were spirited away, occupied countries' central bank reserves vanished, synagogue ritual items were seized. Everything funneled into an administrative network that made plunder a matter of state policy. The seizure of gold was particularly symbolic. Bullion from central banks traveled on heavily guarded trains, while jewelry, coins, gold dental work extracted from concentration camp victims, and even liturgical pieces were melted down under Reichsbank control, overseen by the sinister economist Walther Funk. This wealth financed the war effort, purchased raw materials via neutral intermediaries, and kept the Nazi war machine running. But as defeat loomed, that gold began to disappear. In the final months of the conflict, while Berlin was relentlessly bombed and Allied forces closed in from the west and the Red Army from the east, the Nazi leadership orchestrated a vast dispersal of its treasures. Secret convoys, sealed trains, camouflage trucks, and coded documents moved gold, art, and looted goods to remote caches. Abandoned mines, castles, alpine bunkers, and deep lakes that could swallow a secret forever. One of the most enigmatic episodes involves the so-called Gold Train, which, according to multiple testimonies, departed from Breslau, today's Wrocław, Poland, in the war's closing days, allegedly carrying tons of gold, gemstones, secret documents, and works of art. It vanished somewhere in Lower Silesia, where Nazi tunnels from Project Reese served as clandestine refuges and depots. Decades of excavations, some by private treasure hunters, others by governments, have yielded no conclusive evidence. The legend of the train endures. Talk of hidden treasure also surrounds Austria's Lake Toplitz, a hard-to-reach body of water cloaked in silence and dense forest. Under its murky depths, Allied divers recovered documents, forged British banknotes from Operation Bernhard, and items linked to Nazi propaganda. Many believe the Third Reich's gold was dumped into that lake during the final days, when the regime crumbled. Yet not all Nazi gold was literally buried or sunken. Several high-ranking officials, among them Heinrich Himmler and Martin Bormann, planned financial survival networks for the post-war era. Known in some circles as the Ratlins, these routes facilitated the escape of war criminals to South America and North Africa, funded in part by stolen Reich's gold. That wealth sustained covert operations, shell corporations, and shadow networks that operated for decades under the radar of post-war confusion. Thus, the Nazi treasure is not merely an archaeological puzzle, but a profound political and moral phenomenon. It is not only about uncovering chests or sealed bullion. It is about confronting how power can mutate, disguise itself, and re-emerge under new guises. Many fortunes built in the post-war era in so-called neutral countries trace back, directly or indirectly, to those vanished shipments, to banks that laundered blood-stained gold, to transactions where morality was washed away as easily as forged passports. Over the years, international commissions have traced portions of the spoils. Switzerland, Portugal, Sweden, and other European nations have returned some central bank reserves they received. Yet the majority of Nazi gold remains unaccounted for, dissolved in secret accounts, converted into real estate, invested in stocks, lost beneath the foundations of a Europe eager to rebuild without looking back. How many tons still remain is hotly disputed, spawning theories that skirt the line between conspiracy and verifiable fact. Today, treasure hunters in the Bavarian forests employ ground-penetrating radar, legal teams comb military and bank archives for overlooked clues, and documentarians interview elderly witnesses who recall strange convoys guarded by pale, anxious soldiers. Every scrap of evidence, a mislabeled report, a discarded blueprint, might open the door to a sealed chamber or the vault of an intact bunker, unlocking the cold heart of this enigma. The treasure of the Third Reich is, in many ways, the darkest echo of an era. It is not a romantic pirate's haul, but the concrete residue of a regime built on plunder, slaughter, and domination. It is the tangible manifestation of suffering turned into wealth, of art turned into trophies, of culture crushed and packed like war booty, that makes it more than a mere historical curiosity. It is an open moral wound that, having never fully healed, still oozes uncomfortable truths. Hunting for this gold is not just about unearthing shining metal. It is also about confronting what was swept under the rug, questioning which collective memories were buried with the bullion, which truths were melted down with the bars. As long as missing trains, empty vaults, censored archives, and unclaimed masterpieces endure, the story of the Nazi treasure remains alive, not merely as a wartime anecdote, but as a warning etched into silence. the treasure of the Queen of Sheba. At the crossroads of ancient incense routes and ivory caravans, between the scorching sands of the Horn of Africa and the vanished oases of southern Arabia, there lives the enduring legend of a queen who transcended her own time, the Queen of Sheba. Her name, steeped in aromatic perfumes and sacred scrolls, crosses religious and cultural borders in Arab, Hebrew, and Ethiopian traditions, symbolizing unparalleled wisdom, diplomatic mastery, and a wealth beyond imagining. Yet behind the shimmering veil of these stories lingers one question that has endured for millennia. What became of the fabulous treasure she brought to Jerusalem, or left scattered across the ancient world? The most familiar account appears in the first book of Kings and in the biblical chronicles. These texts describe how a mysterious monarch journeyed from a distant land to test King Solomon's famed wisdom. Her arduous trek led her to Israel's heart, where, true to her royal bearing, she arrived laden with extraordinary gifts. Spices in quantities never before seen, gemstones of dazzling color, rare types of wood, and so much gold that Solomon's treasury could scarcely hold it. These offerings astonished even the legendary king. But the story deepens in Ethiopian lore, particularly in the Book of Glory known as the Kebra Nagast. There the queen is called Makeda, and the narrative takes an intimate turn. She and Solomon conceive a son, Menelik. According to tradition, Menelik later returned to Jerusalem and then carried the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, where it is said to remain hidden in the highlands of Aksum. This version links her treasure directly with one of the ancient world's most sacred relics. Archaeologists place the Sabaean kingdom in modern-day Yemen, where from the 8th century before Christ until the 2nd century after Christ a sophisticated civilization flourished. The ruins of Merib, its capital, reveal monumental temples, advanced irrigation channels, and stone walls carved with symbols that outlast the desert storms. In that sweeping expanse of sand, teams continue to search for tangible proof of a splendor that once united commerce and culture. Sabaean traders dominated the incense trade, a commodity more prized than gold, in caravans that connected India to the Mediterranean, sub-Saharan Africa to Mesopotamia. Myrrh, amber, jade, and spices passed through their hands. Consequently, the Queen of Sheba's treasure was not war booty, but the material reflection of a peaceful trading empire powered by diplomacy and cultural exchange. The line separating myth from history remains blurred. Inscriptions name various Sabaean queens, but scholars still debate which one inspired the legendary figure. Some view Makeda as a composite symbol of multiple historical rulers. Others insist she was a real queen of extraordinary power, whose true story patriarchal chronicles could record only as myth. Yet material traces endure. In the Ethiopian highlands, monasteries and rock-cut churches guard ancient chests said to descend from Makeda's legacy. Some boast gold fittings and inscriptions in Guizi, the region's ancient liturgical language. Others bear designs recalling Sabaean artistry or hints of Hebrew influence. Though modern archaeologists seldom gain direct access, the custodians' testimonies sustain the belief that part of her treasure survived, protected from empires and plunderers alike. Perhaps the real treasure was not just in gold or gems, but in knowledge. Monsoon patterns, navigation techniques, trade agreements, diplomatic codes, and linguistic skills. Subtle assets no map could capture. The queen's material gifts were merely the visible tip of an intricate web of power defined by vision as much as by wealth. Modern digs in Yemen and Ethiopia press on despite political turmoil and remote landscapes. International teams map ancient caravan trails, uncover burial sites, and record oral traditions. Yet no single vault brimming with royal treasures has emerged. The mystery remains alive, and its allure undiminished. Perhaps the power of this legend lies precisely in its ambiguity. Makeda, or whatever her true name, may never have existed exactly as we read in the texts. Yet her image shaped cultures, inspired kingdoms, forged dynastic myths, and wove a narrative in which wisdom and wealth walked hand in hand under a single crown. And her treasure? It may yet lie in a chest buried beneath Merib's ruins, in an Ethiopian monastery's concealed crypt, or in the whispered tale of an old caravan guide who once saw a queen crowned in incense and gold, ruler of an empire we touch only through legend. The treasures of the South Sea. In the salty expanse of the Pacific, where maps once held the promise of discovery and the horizon knew no bounds, lie regions humming with echoes of a past filled with mystery and greed. Early European sailors called these distant islands, scattered shores, and hidden atolls the South Sea. But more than a geographic name, this ocean is defined by the secrets it keeps beneath its surface. Among coral reefs, volcanic fissures, and ancient submerged mountain chains that have slumbered for centuries. From the 16th through the 18th century, Spanish galleons set sail across the Pacific, their holds overflowing with the riches of the Americas. Gold, silver, gemstones, ivory, Chinese porcelain, spices, and pearls. These voyages, known as the Manila Galleon Trade and the Tornaviage or Return Journey, braved storms, typhoons, water shortages, and the perils of open sea. Each vessel carried not only priceless cargo but also unique navigational charts, secret maps, official records, and often high-ranking passengers whose fate in a shipwreck could spell political crisis for the crown. The treasure of the South Sea is not a single find but a constellation of stories, an archipelago of legends in which each island marks a shipwreck, a naval battle, a pirate raid, a failed mutiny, or a fatal storm. Fragments lie buried in marine mud or scattered on beaches known only to local fishermen. Many ships vanished without a trace or distress call, swallowed silently by an ocean that rarely returns what it takes. Among the best-known wrecks is that of the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, nicknamed La Capitana by 17th-century sailors. Laden with gold, pearls, and porcelain, it was attacked by English pirates William Dampier and Charles Swan in 1687 off the Marianas. Despite multiple modern expeditions, much of its cargo remains unrecovered, still lying hundreds of meters down amid treacherous currents and impenetrable coral growth. Another tale captivates treasure seekers: the lost riches of Lima during the South American Wars of Independence. As patriots closed in on Lima, Spanish loyalists hurriedly loaded church, monastic, and treasury valuables onto a single ship bound for Mexico or Panama. The vessel never arrived. Some believe its hold was plundered and hidden on remote Pacific islands, Cocos or the Galapagos, long havens for pirates and outlaws. Added to these stories are the exploits of English privateers like Francis Drake, who not only seized Spanish treasure ships but reportedly stashed part of his loot in caves or secluded coves along the coasts of what is now Chile or Peru. Over the centuries, many have searched in vain. They returned with handfuls of coins, rusted artifacts, and fragments that hint at the truth behind the legend. Colonial archives scattered across Madrid, Lima, and Manila contain lists of lost cargoes, ship manifests, and names of vessels never officially recorded as sunk yet never arriving at their destinations. These documents feed modern hunts, which now deploy high-resolution sonar, magnetic seabed sensors, and robotic submersibles capable of diving to depths once unimaginable. Yet finding treasure in the South Sea requires not only technology but patience, intuition, and a stroke of luck. Currents have shifted sands for centuries, tectonic movements have remapped the seabed, and the marine ecosystem has swallowed entire structures in its silent embrace. Even so, some treasures have surfaced, like the remains of the San Jose off Colombia's coast, discovered with thousands of gold ingots intact. Most, however, lie still hidden, as if the sea demands a price for each secret revealed. Occasionally, storms wash ashore fragments of 17th-century Chinese porcelain, a coin stamped in Potosi, or a ring with no known owner. These fragments are tokens, whetting the appetite of an ocean that toys with those who seek to comprehend its depths. At its core, the treasure of the South Sea transcends mere metal and gems. It embodies the vanished trading networks of colonial empires and the cultures subjugated to supply European courts with their spoils. Each bar, pearl, and shattered vessel bears silent witness to a broader history in which the sea was both accomplice and gravekeeper. Today, the South Sea remains a treasure island in both the geographic and metaphorical sense. An unfinished map, a living legend, where every discovery opens new questions, and where the greatest prize may be the quest itself, that deeply human urge to bring the invisible into sight and awaken the silent witnesses of a vanished world. The treasure of the Vikings. the gold of the Nordic kings. In those northern lands where winter seems endless, where the aurora borealis dances like spirits over fjords, and ice is as common as rock, a culture thrived that was feared, admired, and often misunderstood for centuries. The Vikings, men and women from the far north who sailed the seas in long dragon-headed vessels, were far more than ruthless raiders. They were myth-makers, long-distance traders, master craftsmen, and above all storytellers of their own destiny. Among the many tales they carried on their sails, few shine as persistently as those of the treasures of the Nordic kings, a wealth amassed not only by force, but by cunning, diplomacy, and a deep belief that gold should accompany them even beyond death. The Viking world was dynamic and fiercely interconnected. From coastal villages in Norway and Sweden to the steppe realms of Kievan Rus, from the shores of Ireland to Constantinople, they wove a network of maritime and river routes that functioned like a spider's web of commerce, conquest, and culture. Through these routes passed not only swords but also silks, Arabian coins, Baltic gemstones, Eastern spices, and gold bars stamped with hammers of Thor. These treasures were more than mere possessions. They held ceremonial, political, and spiritual significance. In skaldic sagas and epic poems, rulers shone not just for their lineage but for the generosity with which they distributed gold to their followers. Presenting gold was an exercise of power. Safeguarding it was seen as sacred foresight. Some of these riches were uncovered long after Viking swords had rusted. Treasures like the one found in Galloway, Scotland, in 2014, or the hoard unearthed on the German Baltic coast at Hidden Sea, revealed exquisite items. Hand-hammered gold pendants bearing Christian and pagan motifs, intricately braided bracelets requiring supreme skill, coins from the Abbasid Caliphate, ivory crosses, and filigree-decorated brooches. Remarkably, they testify to an open, cosmopolitan mindset that absorbed outside influences without relinquishing its core identity. Yet part of the treasure remains missing. Sagas attribute vast gold hoards to legendary kings, Harold Bluetooth, Olaf the Saint, Ragnar Lodbrok, among others, who amassed fortunes capable of financing armies, building fleets of dragons, or founding entire colonies. It is said these chieftains, foreseeing their deaths, ordered their treasures buried with them or hidden in tombs sealed by rock and silence. Burial mounds like those at Uppsala or Sutton who yielded stunning finds, but many royal tombs remain undiscovered, as though the earth itself swallowed their secrets. In Norse tradition, a king was mortal, but his passage to the other world had to be accompanied by symbols of his earthly power. Grave goods were not mere offerings but proofs of his status as warrior, navigator, and lord. Rings, necklaces, rune-inscribed swords, drinking horns, god figurines, ornate shields, sacrificed animals, and even whole boats were placed beside him to ensure his continued journey. This ritual explains why so much Viking gold sank. It was never meant for the living. Some of it was broken, burned, or dispersed in final rites. Much lies hidden still in undiscovered burial mounds and caves. And yet the search continues. Across Scandinavia, in anonymous fields, eroded hills, and ancient bogs, archaeologists keep uncovering scattered clues. A single metal glint on radar can lead to a complete bracelet. A brooch among tree roots may mark an undiscovered tomb. Many finds were plowed over or sold before they could be studied. Some ended up in private collections unrecorded, but the trail has never vanished entirely. Viking treasures are not confined to Scandinavia. They have been found in England, Scotland, Ireland, France, Russia, Ukraine, and even parts of Central Asia, evidence of their astonishing reach and adaptability. In many of those regions, local legends speak of hidden chambers, unexcavated burial mounds, and settlements buried under centuries of vegetation or later construction. Today's archaeologists wield sophisticated tools, satellite imagery, laser scanning, drones, geophysical sensors, that reveal hidden features without digging. Yet Viking gold remains elusive, as though it knows its true purpose is not simply to be found, but to continue fueling the imagination. Each newly discovered artifact does more than illuminate the past. It demands we listen to history. It speaks in a language of metals and forms, symbols and silences, telling us who that people were and who they aspired to be. And in that dialogue between earth and tale, between stone and blood, the gold of the Nordic kings still gleams, buried beneath layers of centuries, awaiting the next seeker willing to hear its story. The treasure of the lost city of El Dorado. Deep within South America, where the rainforest stretches like an endless sea of green, where treetops intertwine in an age-old language and rivers flow with solemn ceremony, the legend of a city gleams with both wonder and avarice. El Dorado. Its origins lie in the high plains of present-day Colombia, where the Muisca peoples once performed a sacred ritual. Their ruler, the Zipa, coated himself in gold dust and waded into Lake Guatavita to cast precious offerings to the gods. For him, it was an act of faith and cosmic balance. Yet for later conquerors it signaled that somewhere lay an entire city made of gold. From a gilded man, the myth grew into a city. From the city into a sprawling kingdom. The quest for El Dorado became a race of egos among Spanish conquistadors, ambitious generals, and bold explorers. In 1541, Francisco de Orellana traveled hundreds of miles down the Amazon in a fragile canoe, though he knew the jungle claimed more lives than any foe. Pedro de Ursua and Lope de Aguirre followed the river, and Sir Walter Raleigh scoured the Orinoco for a golden metropolis he never found. In the 20th century, Colonel Percy Fawcett vanished into Brazil's Mato Grosso, convinced that a city of unimaginable wealth awaited him. With each failure, El Dorado shifted its location. Hidden in the heart of the Amazon, then on Venezuela's savannas, in the swamps of the Orinoco, atop the Tepuy Plateaus, or in submerged ruins beneath Lake Parim. Archaeologists have since uncovered the remains of carefully terraced fields, stone platforms, and pathways through dense foliage, yet never an edifice of pure metal. Instead, they found evidence of a highly advanced agricultural and urban network that at least partly explains the legend of a gilded empire. Today, cutting-edge tools such as LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar pierce the rainforest canopy, while drones map winding rivers. Yet El Dorado remains elusive. The real treasure appears to be intellectual and archaeological rather than metallic. The discovery that the Amazon was not an untouched wilderness but a thriving, human-shaped ecosystem. The true allure of El Dorado lies not only in the promise of golden splendor, but in the interplay of human yearning, exploratory zeal, and the unknown. Each expedition, each disappointment, every newly unearthed platform or ruin reminds us of unanswered questions. Who built these cities? What role did trade, ritual, and ancestor worship play? Where do fact and fiction blur? And ultimately, what compels us to keep searching, even when all evidence suggests the Golden Kingdom never existed as metal at all? Perhaps El Dorado is not a place but an idea, the promise of limitless abundance, the dream of an empire that transcends the bounds of possibility. And so the true treasure of this myth lies buried not beneath mud or waves, but within our relentless drive to reveal the unseen and uncover the story that begins only when we break beyond the golden mirage. The treasure of the Sumerians, the origins of gold. Long before the great Mediterranean civilizations raised their columns and the Andean empires sculpted stone in step with the sun, humanity was just beginning to grasp the concepts of time, writing, and power. Even in those earliest days, there existed a land where history took shape. Sumer, a realm of clay nestled between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Here, amid cuneiform tablets, skyscraping ziggurats, and temples dedicated to unseen forces, the fascination with gold was born. But Sumerian gold was not yet an emblem of empty luxury, nor did it serve as currency as it would centuries later. In the dawn of recorded history, this yellow, dense metal carried meanings far beyond the material. It was considered the very body of the gods, the physical manifestation of the sacred within the human world. There was no separation between aesthetic and spiritual realms. Gold was used in rituals and adornments designed not to display power, but to connect the wearer with celestial spheres. It was a medium, not a goal, a language, not mere ornament. Excavations at Uar, one of Sumer's most iconic cities, have uncovered royal tombs that astonish with their richness, artistry, and antiquity. In the famous tomb of Queen Pwabi, archaeologists found pure gold jewelry crafted with an almost anachronistic delicacy. Diadems adorned with floral motifs, earrings as intricate as woven silk, combs, rings, drinking vessels, and other ornate objects unmatched in refinement. The truly extraordinary aspect is not only the abundance of these treasures, but their symbolic weight. They were offerings for the afterlife, part of a funerary assemblage meant to accompany the sovereign into the realm of the gods. Yet beyond these well-preserved finds lie hints of a far greater treasure whose full scale and location remain uncertain. Sumerian tablets speak of sacred storehouses and hidden vaults within temples consecrated to Enlil, Inanna, and Anu. They record meticulously kept inventories of gold, lapis lazuli, copper, and silver, an obsession with precision that mirrors their broader understanding of cosmic order. Over time, many of these deposits vanished in wars, looting, or were buried under layers of sand and memory that shroud every fallen civilization. Subsequent empires, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, exploited these ancient hoards. Some objects were melted down, others stripped of context, and many simply disappeared, as if gold itself refused to belong solely to those driven by greed. Today, references remain in cuneiform to sealed chambers and forgotten caches beneath the mounds of Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, and Uruk, sites still largely unexcavated due to modern conflict and instability. Still, even if no additional artifacts ever emerge, the true legacy of the Sumerians remains intact. They gave humanity its first writing system, the building blocks of legal codes, early astronomical observations, and the first economic records. To them, gold served as a symbol of permanence, an uncorrodable metal that gleamed even in darkness, rare enough to reflect the divine. Hence, they used it not as currency but as a mark of eternity. The objects found in royal tombs were never meant for daily use. They were intended for the journey between worlds. Throughout the 20th century, many Sumerian treasures excavated by pioneers, such as Leonard Woolley, were transported to museums in Europe and America. While this preserved key artifacts, it also fueled the sense that the heart of the treasure still lies in its homeland, between the rivers, in cities like Uruk, and Nippur, whose deepest layers remain undisturbed by modern archaeology. Beneath those layers may slumber the most sacred votive offerings, sealed in chambers untouched for more than 4 millennia. Yet whether or not another golden artifact sees the light of day, the Sumerian treasure lives on. They were the first to imagine a universe governed by cycles, to conceive of time as more than a succession of days, and to recognize language as a means to record the will of deities. In that rich tapestry of innovation, gold fulfilled its role as a silent testimony to all that defies time. Perhaps for this reason its treasures remain elusive. They were never meant to be discovered, but to be remembered, echoes of a promise that endures beyond the ruins. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this dive into the world's hidden secrets. Which of these treasures would you search for? Do you believe any are still waiting to be found? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read your theories.